Lu Sheng rested his hands on his waist, approached Qin Shijun and with a penetrating expression asked where he had heard all those things. Upon feeling Lu Sheng's gaze, Qin Shijun began to observe him in silence, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, placed his hand on our boy's shoulder, and with a cheerful smile asked him not to make a fuss since it was common for a martial saint to choose a concubine, revealing that at the time, even the supreme martial saint had done so once. Lu Sheng began to observe his friend in silence without interrupting. Qin Shijun stopped resting his hand on Lu Sheng's shoulder, extended his hand to one side, and with a confident smile mentioned that it had been very complicated for the military department to obtain such a divine figure as the god of the army. The attention of Lu Sheng and Snowy focused on Qin Shijun and their eyes widened in surprise. According to Qin Shijun, if the god of the army didn't find about 17 or 18 wives and didn't have at least 100 children, the high command of the army would be furious. Qin Shijun's eyes began to shine with arrogance. He put his arm around Lu Sheng's neck, and with a mischievous smile explained that he had heard the god of the army was quite young. And as Lu Sheng already knew, young people were full of energy. He even bet that with 17 or 18 wives he would not have enough. Lu Sheng couldn't help but blush, lowered his head, and with an embarrassed gaze began to look at the ground, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, began to show a finger, and with a smile said that according to his experience the god of the army was going to have more than 20 wives. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's attention fixed on his finger and his eyes widened in surprise and his mind filled with confusion. Qin Shijun started pointing towards the sky with his finger, and with a confident expression said that the god of the army was going to have at least 100 children. Bao Bai started to gaze towards the ground in silence. Lu Sheng gave Qin Shijun a soft punch on the head and asked him not to spread false rumors. Qin Shijun closed his eyes and started screaming in pain. Lu Sheng's punch left a small bump on Qin Shijun's head. He began touching his head and with a serious expression said that they were not false rumors, but then decided not to talk more about the subject since Lu Sheng was not going to understand. Bao Bai crossed his arms and with a confused gaze began thinking in silence. While Snowy was sunk in her thoughts, Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin, approached her, and while his eyes were shining with curiosity, he began smiling and asked Lu Sheng to hide Snowy well once the god of the army arrived. Lu Sheng closed his eyes and began to ponder in silence. Qin Shijun approached him and began to observe him attentively with a curious gaze. Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin again, and with a confident smile mentioned that if the god of the army noticed her, there could be a big problem. Snowy's eyes began to shine with sadness. She placed her hands on Lu Sheng's shoulders and thought that Qin Shijun was right. Upon feeling her touch, Lu Sheng came out of his thoughts and his eyes widened in confusion. With a serious gaze, Lu Sheng began to touch his head and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The attention of Snowy and Qin Shijun focused on our boy. They began to observe him in silence. While they were distracted, someone appeared behind them and noticed that Shijun had also arrived. Upon hearing the voice, Snowy's and Qin Shijun's eyes filled with curiosity and surprise, making them turn around. 3 men appeared, one had a shaved head, who began to look at Lu Sheng and the others. The attention of the blonde-haired man was fixed on Snowy and a smile appeared on his face. The brown-haired man put his hands on his waist and with a smile admitted that it had been a long time since he last saw Qin Shijun. Lu Sheng began to observe Qin Shijun. Not knowing who these guys were, Qin Shijun's eyes filled with fear. He lowered his head and in a serious tone revealed that the brown-haired man was his older brother. According to him, this wasn't good since there was an annoying guy with them. The brother's attention was fixed on Snowy and his eyes widened with joy. He extended his hand and remembered that the last time he had seen her had been when she graduated from the martial arts university. So much time had passed that he could hardly recognize her. Upon hearing this, Snowy raised her head and began to ponder in silence. With a joyful expression, Snowy greeted Qin Shijun. Qin Shijun and Lu Sheng began to look at each other with a smile and their eyes began to shine. Qin Shijun extended his hands and with a serene gaze first introduced Lu Sheng as Snowy's boyfriend and the general of the Eastern Military Command, then introduced his older brother Qin Shijun. Qin Shiong's eyes were filled with surprise and confusion. He extended his hand to shake hands with Lu Sheng. He couldn't believe that being so young Lu Sheng was already a general. Just before they could shake hands, someone was surprised to hear that Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Qin Shiong felt somewhat confused and went on alert. It was the blonde-haired man who approached Lu Sheng and began to stare at him with a furious gaze since he couldn't believe that a loser like Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. Qin Shiong began to observe the man in silence, not knowing what he had in mind. Snowy's eyes widened in surprise and fear, realizing that this man was Wang Yao. Wang Yao placed his hand on Lu Sheng's shoulder, started staring at Snowy with a furious gaze, and asked since when she had a boyfriend. Feeling Wang Yao's gaze, Snowy's eyes filled with fear. With a nervous tone, she said that this wasn't his business. A smile appeared on Wang Yao's face. Then his eyes began to shine with rage, revealing that he had loved her for 25 years. He couldn't believe that now she was saying this was none of his business. Instead of feeling fear, Snowy's eyes began to shine with confidence. Just before things could escalate, Qin Shiong intervened, stood in the middle, extended his hand and with a serious expression said that Wang Yao was crazy. It didn't matter if he liked Snowy. She didn't like him. Qin Shiong crossed his arms and with a confident expression said that what he hated most was people like him who acted as if everything were someone else's fault. He asked Wang Yao to stop making drama since nobody liked him, not knowing whether he had gone crazy after spending 20 years abroad. Wang Yao clenched his teeth and couldn't help getting angry. He tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing martial energy, with a furious gaze he asked if Qin Shiong wanted to fight. Qin Shiong began to observe and, far from feeling fear, agreed to have a fight since he wanted to see what skills he had learned abroad. They prepared to fight. But just then, Qin Shiong stepped in between them and while his body was releasing an intense aura, ordered them to stop arguing. Upon feeling his aura, Qin Shiong and Wang Yao calmed down. Then Qin Shiong approached Lu Sheng, greeted him as a sign of respect and apologized, asking Snowy to please take Lu Sheng to the mansion. Lu Sheng and Snowy began observing him in silence. While Snowy's eyes were shining with rage, she decided to listen to Qin Shiong, grabbed Lu Sheng by the arm, and decided to take him to the mansion. Wang Yao clenched his fists and couldn't help but feel furious, but Qin Shiong stepped in between and extended his hand, asking him not to do anything reckless. Wang Yao's eyes widened with hatred. According to him, Lu Sheng was nothing compared to him, since he was the disciple of a martial saint, and his master was the legendary pink swordsman of the Eagle Empire, revealing that his brothers were the best level 8 experts in the whole world. Without wasting another second, Wang Yao turned his back on them and started running, swearing revenge on Lu Sheng. Seeing this, Qin Shiong's eyes filled with concern. He extended his hand and tried to stop him. Lu Sheng, who was standing behind, began to observe Wang Yao in silence. Qin Shiong put his hand over his face, closed his eyes and felt somewhat frustrated, knowing that this idiot had just returned from abroad, and didn't know that Lu Sheng had defeated martial master Zhao Ji. Knowing that, being angry, Wang Yao had gone to look for someone to take revenge on. But today, with this event, there could be no conflict, since if they bothered the god of war, no family could bear the consequences. Qin Shiong bowed his head before Lu Sheng, and with a sincere gaze asked for forgiveness, explaining that he didn't know something like this was going to happen. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with rage. He admitted it was his fault because if he had come more seriously, this wouldn't have happened. Now he finally understood what all that display of power was for. It was to keep idiots away. The attention of Qin Shiong and Snowy focused on Lu Sheng, and their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what Lu Sheng meant by display of power. Our boy remained silent without responding. Several minutes later, someone returned and began to point at Lu Sheng with his finger. It was Wang Yao. While his eyes were shining with hatred, he began to point at Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, revealing that he had stolen his woman. A group of men appeared, and a confident smile spread across Wang Yao's face. The muscular man began to touch his head, and with a gaze full of surprise mentioned that he wanted to see who was the blind one who dared to mess with his people. Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, began to show a calm expression. The attention of the muscular man and the others focused on him, their eyes filled with fear, making them begin to tremble since they knew better than anyone who Lu Sheng was. Without hesitating for a second, they knelt before Lu Sheng. The muscular man put his hands on top of his head, closed his eyes, and while sweating like crazy, begged for mercy. Seeing this, Wang Yao's eyes widened in fear. With a confused gaze, he asked his brother what he was doing. Lu Sheng took a step forward, and upon noticing this, Wang Yao's brother knelt before him and began to sweat like crazy. Lu Sheng began to gaze at the ground and decided not to hold back anymore. Upon hearing this, the brother's body began to tremble with fear, knowing that he was dead. Lu Sheng raised his hand, and from it began to emerge a powerful martial energy. Not long after, the powerful martial spirit of Lu Sheng emerged from his body. The arrogant Wang Yao fell on his butt to the ground, and his eyes widened in fear and surprise. He couldn't help but sweat without knowing what was happening. Qin Shijun put his arm in front of his face, and a surprised smile appeared on his face. The eyes of Qin Xiong and Snowy widened in surprise, making their jaws drop. The brother realized that this was only an incarnation formed by Lu Sheng's vital energy and blood. The martial spirit of Lu Sheng began to emit golden energy and grow. First 10 meters, then 100 meters, and then 1,000 meters. Qin Shijun and the others looked like ants compared to it. Qin Xiong's eyes filled with fear upon noticing that Lu Sheng's martial spirit kept growing. Lu Sheng's spirit became so large that it could even be seen from space. Seeing how powerful Lu Sheng was, Snowy put her hand over her mouth and couldn't help but blush, while on the other side, Wang Yao's eyes filled with tears and fear. His brother and the others stood up and with a serious gaze gave the military salute as a sign of respect. The sky filled with black clouds, and Lu Sheng's martial spirit could be seen from everywhere. Snowy's mother and father approached the mansion window, and their attention was fixed on Lu Sheng's spirit. The father went into shock, not knowing what was happening, while on the other side, the mother put her hand over her mouth. The father's eyes filled with surprise, realizing that the god of war had arrived. Upon hearing this, the mother's eyes widened in fear, leaving her in shock. Qin Shijun's jaw dropped upon realizing that Lu Sheng was the god of war. While our boy's body was surrounded by golden energy, he slowly began to descend towards Snowy. Her attention fixed on Lu Sheng and her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't know how this was possible. Our boy took Snowy's hand, and with a sincere gaze admitted that he had wanted to tell her for a long time that he was the god of war, but had never found the right moment, and also feared she wouldn't be able to accept it. Snowy began to look into Lu Sheng's eyes, and then she couldn't help but blush and with a loving gaze asked if truly the god of war was her boyfriend. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, a few minutes later, Lu Sheng and Snowy approached the Dong family villa, and something caught their attention, making their eyes fill with curiosity and surprise. 3 high-ranking generals appeared. Among them was Snowy's father. They formed up and with a serious gaze introduced themselves as Dong Chengding, Qin Hao, and Wang Hedong and greeted the god of war with respect. Lu Sheng turned around and began to observe the generals in silence. Our boy was not alone. At his side were Qin Shijun and Snowy. A crowd of high-ranking soldiers approached the area. Snowy put her hands over her mouth and went into shock as she realized that Lu Sheng was truly the god of war. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy. With a kind smile, he extended his hand and told his father-in-law that it was not necessary to do this, suggesting entering the villa and talking inside. Chengding's attention was fixed on our boy and his eyes widened in surprise. With a smile he nodded. General Qin Hao's eyes filled with rage and his gaze fixed on Lu Sheng. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel furious since Chengding had such an incredible son-in-law as Lu Sheng. Wang Hedong's attention was fixed on Chengding and his eyes expanded in surprise, realizing that this time old Dong had hit the jackpot. The eyes of the generals and soldiers widened in fear. They could not believe that someone as young as Lu Sheng was the god of war and the #1 martial saint. Upon observing closely, they also noticed that the one next to Lu Sheng was the daughter of the Dong family. They knew that this time the Dong family was going to become rich. In front of the Dong villa there was a large crowd of people, most were young women. With an angry expression, A blonde woman began to push the other women, making it clear that the daughter of the Dong family was not a goddess. If she had been able to captivate the god of war, she thought she also had chances. The attention of the woman who was next to her focused on her, and her eyes widened in confusion. She couldn't believe that the Qin family wanted to get ahead again. The women began to push each other, swearing that the god of war was theirs. Among them there was a man dressed as a woman. With a loving gaze he tried to capture Lu Sheng's attention. The red-haired woman's eyes filled with confusion and surprise. For her this was a joke, so she asked if he had also come to join the commotion. The man turned around and with a gaze full of determination said that he was not going to know if he didn't try, since the taste of great characters was unpredictable. The woman's attention fixed on him and her mind filled with confusion. Instead of continuing the conversation, she remained silent. The crowd of women began to surround Lu Sheng. Qin Shiyun began to observe them and his eyes widened in surprise, leaving him in shock. He remembered that Lu Sheng had said he was a general. He could not believe that in reality our boy was the god of war, realizing that Lu Sheng always knew how to surprise people. Thinking this, his eyes filled with joy, and he could not help but laugh out loud. Qin Shiyun approached him and could not help but feel somewhat surprised upon knowing that his brother was the friend of the god of war. Qin Shiyun closed his eyes, began to point at himself with his thumb, and while his nose was growing like Pinocchio's, with a proud smile he asked his older brother not to worry, since from now on, he was going to take care of him. He put his hand on his forehead and with a smile apologized to Wang Yao for having underestimated him all this time. Wang Yao, who was standing next to him, turned around and his eyes widened in confusion, and he couldn't help but sweat, giving a thumbs up. Qin Shiyun remembered that Wang Yao had dared to compete with the god of war for a woman, and had even gone looking for someone to give the god of war a beating. According to Qin Shiyun, Wang Yao was someone impressive, and he was willing to call him the man with the most guts in the Dragon Kingdom. Upon hearing this, Wang Yao stepped back and couldn't help but feel afraid, his face filled with panic and his eyes with tears. He began to scream and swore that he wasn't someone like that. He fell to his knees on the ground and put his hands on his head. He was so scared that his soul left through his mouth. Everyone approached him and began to observe him in silence. 3 days later, there was a luxurious cruise sailing on the sea. Inside were Lu Sheng and Snowy lying on hammocks. Lu Sheng, who wore sunglasses, put his hand behind his head, took a cocktail and decided to ask her a question. His future father-in-law was a level 8 Grand Martial Master. Lu Sheng's family was ordinary. They had no money or power. He didn't know how to make his father-in-law gladly accept that he would marry his daughter. Lu Sheng began to drink the cocktail, and just before she could answer the question, with a smile he revealed that the answer was very simple. He had to become a martial saint. Lu Sheng left the cocktail on the table, and she asked him to stop showing off. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng had hidden being a martial saint. Our boy said it hadn't been his intention. Our boy stood up, rested his hand on the cruise railing, and his eyes filled with joy as he looked at the sea. A calm smile appeared on his face, since it had been a long time since he felt so relaxed. He didn't know when he could bring his family to enjoy some time together. Snowy approached him, and while she was touching her hair, she began to contemplate the sea, and with a smile asked if Lu Sheng wanted her to send someone for them right now. With a sincere gaze, Lu Sheng said that it wasn't necessary, since he didn't have much time now. Lu Sheng activated his powers and martial energy appeared in his eyes. Not far from the ship, evil energy began to emerge from the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng put on his usual outfit, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and while his eyes were shining with calmness, he revealed that he would come every 7 days from now on to this place, asking her to wear civilian clothes. Snowy's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng, and her eyes widened in confusion and surprise. She did not know what he had in mind. She gave Lu Sheng a kiss on the cheek and asked him to take care of himself, promising to wait until he returned. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy, and with a smile, he nodded his head. Without wasting any more time, Lu Sheng jumped into the water and little by little began to submerge deeper into the sea, first descending 5,000 meters, then 10,000 meters, until finally descending about 20,000 meters. The pressure at this depth was very high, but for Lu Sheng this was no problem. Something began to shine intensely and Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on it. It was a rift surrounded by evil energy. Lu Sheng approached it and began to observe it carefully. Although he had already given instructions to the army to reinforce surveillance and exploration of all the large underground rifts, he did not know if they could really find clues about that apocalyptic crisis, since he learned that a planet-scale threat was approaching. He felt as if he had a stone crushing his heart. There were still 8 years left before the apocalyptic crisis arrived, and at this stage there wasn't much he could do. Even if he found the source of the crisis, he wouldn't have enough power to do anything about it now. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with seriousness and determination. If the apocalypse came with soldiers, he would face them with soldiers. If it came with water, he would face it with earth. Lu Sheng opened the backpack in which he carried energy crystals and let it fall. Then he sat down, put his hands together, closed his eyes and concentrated, causing waves to begin to emerge from his body. As long as his strength was sufficient, he could face any type of crisis calmly. Lu Sheng's aura began to surround the energy crystals, and little by little they began to come out of his backpack and float. Lu Sheng concentrated even more and the energy crystals began to disperse across the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng opened his eyes and his gaze fixed on his hands, making a smile appear on his face. Since the bottom of the ocean of the blue star reached its limit here, only in this place could he withstand the most extreme pressure to temper his martial body, his spiritual strength and his martial will to the absolute limit. His eyes began to shine with confidence, since now all that remained was to wait for the arrival of that guide. An excited smile appeared on his face because when that moment came, he was going to take advantage of the pressure from that level 10 warrior. Lu Sheng stood up and powerful martial energy began to emerge from his body. With this step, he could make the definitive leap into the true realm of 9th level martial saint. A few hours later, with clothes soaked in water, Lu Sheng came out of the sea and returned to the cruise ship. Snowy, who had now changed clothes, approached him, took him by the arm and began to show a kind smile, while Lu Sheng went out once every 7 days to replenish energy crystals and maintain basic contact with his family and army. He focused intensely on cultivating himself, with a dizzying improvement in power. A few days later, Lu Sheng descended to the bottom of the sea again and began to meditate once more, surrounded by strange fish. It was as if he had become that divine saint inside the coffin on the Golden Ring Island again. He saw within him growing increasingly powerful, constantly approaching the true critical line. While he was meditating, the spirit of a demon with glowing eyes appeared in front of him. During the process of his rapid increase in power, Lu Sheng also reflected on a question, and that was, what is truly his real martial appearance? Time flew by and 3 months passed quickly. In the death domain of the Desert and Lion Kingdom, all martial saints were there waiting respectfully for the arrival of the guide. The muscular martial saint began to look toward the sky, and his eyes widened with excitement. He revealed that the guide had arrived. The attention of Cumberland, who was standing next to him, fixed on the sky. Without wasting another second, all the martial saints knelt down, and not long after, golden energy emerged from the sky. Surrounded by a powerful martial energy, the guide descended from the sky. Cumberland also knelt before the guide and they all greeted him with respect. The guide was a being from another planet who wore a powerful yet elegant armor. He had 2 horns and a celestial halo behind his head. The desert was lifeless, without plants or water, only sand. But when the guide took a step forward, grass began to grow under his feet, consuming the sand. In an instant, the desert turned into a beautiful mountain with grass. The attention of the martial saints fixed on it, and their eyes widened in surprise, leaving them in shock. The guide extended his hand and with a smile greeted them back, saying that it had been a long time. The celestial halo of the guide changed color. From gold to blue, Cumberland's attention focused on him and his eyes filled with fear, realizing that the technology and power of the guide had evolved once again. The guide raised his hand and hundreds of capsules began to descend from the sky. He told Cumberland that he had brought everything they had asked for last time to trade. The capsules descended to the ground. Cumberland joined his hand with his fist and with a nervous gaze thanked him. With a cold expression, The guide made it clear that thanking only with words was not enough. One had to show it with concrete actions. He asked where the energy crystals were this time. Cumberland's eyes filled with fear. He tried to speak but was not able. The martial saints began to whisper among themselves. Cumberland lowered his head before the guide, and with his face full of sweat revealed that this time they had not been able to prepare the energy crystals. Just then, the grass and flowers that had grown in the desert withered. His attention fixed on them and his eyes filled with fear. The guide's body began to release an intense energy, capable of crushing all the martial saints, with eyes shining with rage. He asked why they had not brought the energy crystals. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, the guide was so furious that his body began to release a suffocating aura, which started to spread everywhere. Upon feeling the pressure of such power, the martial saint stepped back. Cumberland knelt before the guide, struck his fist against the ground, lowered his head before him, and with a sincere tone decided to inform the guide that this time the production of energy crystals had exceeded by more than 30% compared to the previous time. With a total weight exceeding 500 kilos, Cumberland's eyes widened in fear and his body began to tremble. He did not know how to reveal that Lu Sheng had the energy crystals. The guide clenched his teeth tightly and with a confused expression questioned whether they were planning to give him a surprise in secret. A system window showing Lu Sheng from behind and surrounded by fire appeared. Cumberland stood up, began pointing at it with his hand, and with a gaze full of fear, revealed they wanted to deliver the energy crystals to the guide. But this time all the production of energy crystals had been stolen, asking him to please look at the system window. The system began showing Lu Sheng fighting against several martial saints. Then our boy appeared flying next to the giant energy crystal, and with a smile made it clear that he was invincible. If the guide had any objection, he could come talk to him in person. Far from feeling furious, the guide began to applaud and praise Lu Sheng. He began to observe Lu Sheng closely, and a smile spread across his face as he never thought that a small level 1 resource star like the Blue Planet could produce such an interesting martial talent. The system began to show Lu Sheng staring confidently at the martial saints. The guide remembered that Lu Sheng had said for him to come find him when he arrived, giving the order to the martial saints to take him to Lu Sheng now. The guide began to show an evil smile and felt excited since his journey was not going to be so boring after all. Somewhere in the Dragon Kingdom, Martial Saint Tan Zhongwu was sitting and meditating with his back resting against a tree. Several seconds later, the martial saint opened his eyes and went on alert, realizing that the guide had arrived. His eyes began to shine with fear and joy. He remembered that Lu Sheng had proclaimed himself as someone invincible. But now that the guide had arrived, a question came to the martial saint's mind. He did not know whether Lu Sheng would come out alive or dead after the confrontation. Somewhere in the city was the pavilion of martial overcoming, a beautiful dojo filled with trees. Inside the dojo, someone took off their shoes, revealing some beautiful feet. It was none other than Zhang Yu. She lay down in the hammock, closed her eyes and let out a sigh. With a curious expression, she asked her daughter Lin Wanwan if there was someone she liked, someone she might consider dating. Lin Wanwan began to massage her mother's feet and her eyes widened with nervousness. With an embarrassed expression, she said that for now she didn't feel attracted to anyone. Lin Wanwan's attention focused on her mother's feet, and her eyes filled with surprise. Her mother was a martial saint, and she couldn't give her a foot massage without making an effort. Zhang Yu took a glass of water, got ready to take a sip, but just then, her attention was fixed on her daughter. With a surprised expression, she asked if Lin Wanwan didn't like some boy from the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan's eyes began to shine with sadness. With a sincere gaze, she explained that the people from the martial arts school were like brothers and sisters who had seen her grow up since she was little. They were like her family, so she couldn't think about having something romantic with them. Upon hearing this, Zhang Yu's eyes widened in surprise. She began to observe her daughter in silence. She extended her hand to one side and asked if she was interested in someone outside the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan began to observe her mother, and with a sincere expression mentioned that since she was little, She had barely gone out into the city, so she didn't know many people from outside. With a curious gaze, the mother asked her daughter who it was that she had most admired from the few times she had left the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan's eyes filled with curiosity. She put her hand on her chin and began to ponder in silence. She began to imagine Lu Sheng holding Snowy in his arms. She began to blush, and showing a finger, a joyful smile spread across her face, revealing that the person she had most admired was Snowy's boyfriend, Lu Sheng, since when she was trapped in the cave. Everyone thought she had died, but only Lu Sheng did not abandon her and went straight to save her. If one day she looked for a boyfriend, it had to be someone like Lu Sheng. The image of Lu Sheng holding a spear and with his body emitting martial flames came to Lin Wanwan's mind. Lu Sheng single-handedly defeated all the martial saints at the Great Assembly of the World Clan, earning the title of Invincible Martial Saint. But in Lin Wanwan's heart, what marked her most was that scene where Lu Sheng rescued Snowy. She put her hands on her cheeks, closed her eyes, and couldn't help but feel love when thinking about Lu Sheng. Zheng Yu began to observe her daughter, and a smile spread across her face, as it was just as she had imagined. Soon her smile disappeared and her eyes widened with seriousness, putting her on alert. Her body transformed into energy and she disappeared. She told her daughter that she was going out for a moment, but didn't know when she would return. Upon seeing this, the jaw of Lin Wanwan, who was lost in thought, dropped in surprise and confusion. With a smile, Zheng Yu prepared to put on the ninja mask, knowing that the guide had arrived. She put on the ninja mask and with a serious gaze began to move toward where the guide and the other martial saints were. She did not know if Lu Sheng had really heard what she said last time, so she decided to go check it herself. On the battlefield there was a level cavern. This cavern was full of remains of mutant beasts. Another demon-shaped mutant beast appeared, but a man gave a fierce kick to the beast under its jaw, making it lose balance. Now that the beast was stunned, the man jumped and drove his hand into the chest of the beast, killing it instantly. Not far from the area there was a group of armed men, their attention fixed on the man and their jaws dropped in fear. The eyes of the man who was smoking a cigar widened in surprise, realizing that this boy was crazy, since in order to kill mutant beasts, he didn't even care about his own life. It was as if in his past life he had held a personal grudge against them. The other men began to observe him in silence. This boy was none other than the martial saint Zhao Ji, with an excited expression. Zhao Ji clenched his fists and couldn't help but smile, since the body strengthening technique of the god of war was amazing. Every time he practiced it, it gave him new insights and benefits, and he had no doubt that the god of war was someone who could be at the top of the world. Something caught Zhao Ji's attention and his eyes widened in surprise. Realizing that the guide had arrived, he closed his eyes and began to shake his head, since even though he knew the guide, he didn't know who he was. Seeing that the memories of this body were interfering again, he decided to erase them immediately. Two more mutant beasts appeared. Zhao Ji jumped and began advancing toward them, using all his strength. He lunged at one of them and started hitting it, because the sooner he killed 10 million mutant beasts, the sooner he could return to his original world and avenge all the hatred and humiliation suffered. Somewhere on the planet, there was a man wearing a hat, lost in thought. Not long after, his subordinate arrived, knelt before him and informed him what was happening. A few hours later, a group of powerful warriors began flying with determined gazes. The news of the arrival of the guide spread at the moment when he arrived on Earth. Those powerful martial saint-level warriors who had not gone to wait for him in the desert also began heading at once toward Dragon Kingdom. In the waters of the Ninghai Sea it was daytime, and there was Lu Sheng's luxurious yacht. Snowy's eyes filled with fear, and she couldn't help but sweat as she felt a sense of unease. Just then, the powerful guide appeared behind her and with a calm smile asked if she knew where Lu Sheng was. Upon feeling the aura of the powerful guide, she couldn't help but feel terror and became paralyzed, not knowing what to do. With a curious expression, she turned around and saw the guide and the martial saints. The guide began to show a kind smile, waiting for her response. Snowy's attention focused on the guide and her eyes widened in seriousness as he transmitted to her an extreme sense of fear. When observing carefully, she saw martial saints Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhengyu standing behind the guide, realizing that all the other people on the ship were also martial saints. Her attention focused on the guide and her eyes filled with rage as she realized that the guide was an existence whom even martial saints addressed as Lord, knowing they had come to look for Lu Sheng. With a curious expression, the guide asked why Zhao Ji had not come and questioned whether Lu Sheng had killed him. Instead of answering, Tan Zhongyu began to observe him in silence. With a sincere gaze, Cumberland extended his hand toward the guide and revealed that Snowy was Lu Sheng's fiancée. So by interrogating her, they could learn Lu Sheng's whereabouts and thus find the energy crystals. The guide began to ponder in silence. With her face full of fear, Snowy turned her back on them and started to run, knowing she couldn't let them find Lu Sheng. Just before she could take another step, a strange energy appeared around her body, making her eyes widen in confusion since she didn't know why she couldn't move. Using his power, Cumberland reached out to her and immobilized her with a smile. He mocked her by calling her delusional for thinking that being a level 6 martial artist she could escape in front of them. At that moment, someone called out to Cumberland. Upon hearing the voice, he panicked and turned around. Someone who was flying in the sky realized that the last time they had hit Cumberland, it hadn't been hard enough. Cumberland began looking toward the sky and his eyes widened in fear and surprise, sending him into shock. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,